3. Welcome everyone. Thank you for waiting, and thank you for joining us at this event. We're just going to take a couple seconds while everyone settles in. In the meantime, while everyone is joining and joining their audio, if you could all, if you're comfortable, please introduce yourself in the chat box. We'd love to know who's in the audience with us. I would also encourage our speakers to do so as well. If you could introduce yourself and your organizations, just to get the ball started. And one of our interns, Carolyn, is going to be sending some messages in the chat box that correlate with what I'll be talking about. All right, great. I think in the interest of time, we're going to get started. Thank you for being here. Today's event is the Future of Work, Exploring Organizational Operation in a Hybrid Era. This is a part of the Future of Work event series, which is an ongoing series with SID-United States, and this is our second event within the series. So, we'll have more information coming about other events in the series, and we'll tell you how to access all of that information. A little bit about SID-United States, if you're not familiar with us. We are the largest and the most active chapter of the Society for International Development, which is an international network founded in 1957 to serve as a global forum dedicated to sustainable economic, social, and political development. We serve as a global town square for the international development community, bringing together people from diverse organizations, disciplines, career stages in a neutral, independent forum to share information and discuss important issues and challenges that are facing our community, as we are doing today. There are a few different ways that you can get involved with SID-United States. You can check out a lot of our different events that we have for May and June on our website. And you can also sign up for a weekly newsletter, which has a comprehensive list of all these events, as well as events that some of our institutional members put on. You can apply to be an intern and join our team for the next upcoming semester. Or you can also volunteer to be a co-chair or a work group or network associate. And you'll find information for all of these in the chat box and on the website. You can also follow us on social media and just stay in touch with all the different activities that we're up to. And our handle is at SID-United States on all platforms. A few things to note for today's event. This is a recorded session and we will be sharing it publicly through our network and our social media channels. You can find this recording on YouTube within the next few days. Closed captioning is available and it can be accessed through your own individual settings. If you have any questions for the speakers, please post them in the chat box. And if it's for a specific speaker, please specify that so we can make sure the speaker has a chance to answer it. In the interest of time, we may not be able to get to all the questions, but we will try our best. And with that, I will turn it over to our moderator and a key person in kind of putting this event together and organizing it, Chizi Igwe.
Thanks so much, Malvika, and good morning or afternoon or evening, depending on where you're joining us from. As Malvika mentioned, my name is Chizi Igwe. I serve on the board of the Society for National Development, and I lead our programs committee. And so this year, one of our major themes driven by interest through our members was the future of work. Many of our members in the sector are grappling with decisions around, particularly post-COVID, how do we deal with flexibility, work arrangements, how do we prepare for success in our organizations by future-proofing, how do we think about change and how do we manage that? And so today's conversation is part of the Future of Work series, and we have a really exciting lineup of researchers and practitioners in our field who will share their insights and their lived experience and best practices from leading and running organizations. And so we'll kick it off with a bit of a research highlight with 2 presentations. And then we will have about 25-minute panel conversation, and we'll have about 10 minutes for Q&A at the end. And as Malvika mentioned, if we're not able to get to your question, we will share extra questions with our panelists. And if they're able to, they'll get back to us with questions, and we'll share that with you in the summary for the event. And so to kick us off, I'd like to introduce our first 2 speakers who will be sharing research around their respective areas of expertise. Well, we have LynnAnn Brewer. She's the executive advisor at McLean & Company, and she's a wealth of knowledge in strategic human resources leadership. She's over 20 years of experience in all areas of human resources, including leadership, strategy, design, change management, talent management, competencies, performance, talent acquisition, and diversity and inclusion. She's worked across the private and public sectors, including higher education, state and municipal government, hospitality, technology, healthcare, and more. So we're excited to hear from LynnAnn. She'll kick us off, and then followed by LynnAnn will be Melissa Fisher. Melissa is a senior advisor focusing on workplace culture and design practices at CFAR. She's a cultural anthropologist and has an extensive experience studying and consulting with organizations, workplace culture, leadership, and the built environment. Melissa is trained in anthropology, sociology, and organizational and management studies, and brings an interdisciplinary approach to her practice. She takes a human-centric and inclusive approach to designing workplaces and organizational culture, and she uses the ethnographic skills to understand and optimize how people navigate working in the physical and digital environments. So that was a lot, but as you can see, we have some really great speakers with great expertise. And with that, I will turn it over to LynnAnn to share some highlights and insights from her work.
Great, thank you so much, Cheesy, for that introduction. Am I sharing screen? Can you let me know which screen you see?
You're sharing screen, but you're on the notes version. So if you switch it to the presenter mode, yes.
There we go. Okay, great, thank you. Okay, great. McLean & Company is a trusted partner of HR and leaderships around the world. Our membership is designed to provide you with what you need to drive your organization forward through full service assessment, practice action, and impactful training. Today's objective is we're going to present the HR trend from 2024. We're going to explore major themes from our HR trends report and share some key actions that organizations can take through practical resources based on this finding. Today's topic will cover an era of change, rethinking the approach to skills, and delivering on the key experience. We'll talk about flexible remote work and HR trend spotlight. I have about 10 minutes to present some of the findings. Usually we present this in an hour, so I'll speak quickly and share as much as I can in this very short time with you all. First is around HR trends. It's been an era of change for all of us with everything that we've gone through. And so that is the theme of our report. Around supporting change, we see that jump in priority. For HR organizations in 2024, what we found is that recruiting moved up, recruiting remained the same, providing great employees experience remained the same, but we saw controlling labor costs and supporting change move up in terms of priority, and developing leaders move down. The action to take forward is really focused on recruiting, employee experience, HR budgeting, and headcount planning. Around rethinking the approach to skills, what we found is 44% of core skills will be changing in the next few years. And so it's really critical right now to think about developing skills for the future. What we recommend is having a strategic workforce planning, focusing on learning and development strategy and leadership development. Delivering on the employee experience, what we find is that it's really important to differentiate between employee engagement and employee experience, and understand that engagement is the outcome of all experience, while experience is what employees have at the organization. And so this is our McLean model around employee experience, employee engagement, how that contributes to a positive experience or a negative experience. What we find is around these factors, dimensions of employee experience include technology, culture, physical space, social relationships, and tasks. And we measured all of these responses through our survey. What we find is the risks of not providing a good employee experience are very clear. When organizations are not effective at designing a positive employee experience, 36% see a higher rate of voluntary turnover. And then when we don't provide a good employee experience, we also see stress level in an organization rise, with 1.4 times reporting higher stress. So it's really critical to think about employee experience and your design around that. There's a lot of work to be done around employee experience, with a lot of the work around culture, which includes diversity and inclusion, a strong ability to shape the organizational culture, and social and environmental sustainability performance. The other piece is around tasks. the ability to quickly change at scale to capitalize on new opportunities, the ability to generate and implement new ideas, and workforce productivity. So we see a third of employee experience where we're not doing well is technology, culture, and tasks. Around that, one key thing is to really focus on the employee experience throughout the employee life cycle, using research and tool to drive an approach that really listens to the employee's voice and sentiment throughout the life cycle, and really dig in deep through conducting focus groups. Beyond that is flexibility, and flexibility, what we're talking about is beyond remote work. What we find in our research is a standardized approach to flexibility doesn't work for all employee groups. We have non-office workers and office workers, and we're looking at flexible hours, flexible location, and flexible time off. And so non-office workers are offered less flexibility, with 36% of organizations reporting that they're not offering flexible work to non-office worker versus 25% not offering flexible work options to office workers. So the key is really to take a look at your flexibility and enhance flexibility for both non-office workers and office worker. I'm going to jump into kind of the exciting part of our trends here, and that is around the spotlights. So generative AI is going to gain momentum in 2024. We find that in organizations that are integrating AI, the benefits are really quite clear. They're citing increased productivity and efficiency as the primary reason. Although a lot of organizations are integrating AI, 73% are still not taking steps to integrate, and 27% are. And a lot of it is around risk and policies and procedure. So that's critical to look at the risk, examine the risk, and look at policies and procedure on how you can enhance and start to integrate AI. The next thing is that we found very concerning is there is a decline in DEI. And although DEI efforts are success to organizational success, we find that organizations who continue to support and to do the work around DEI are 1.9 times more likely to have a productive workforce. Organizations need to be prepared to support the needs and experience of a multi-demographic workforce. That includes gender, neurodiversity, ethnicity, age, and national origin. And then the last thing is most organizations are taking a public stance on social issues. These are the numbers here. Frequently, 3.3% of organizations do take a public stance, 23% sometimes do, and 26% rarely, and 46% never. So that's about a 30% of organizations taking a public stance on social issues. So what comes next here? It's important to really look at a people-first diversity, equity, inclusion, could create a framework for determining your organizational strategy to respond to controversial political and social matter, and really get started on integrating AI and creating, looking at foundational training for you and your team to begin to harness the power of generative AI. That concludes my quick review of our HR trends. I did drop the trend into the chat there. So
Thank you, LynnAnn.
Let me know. Yeah, please reach out if you have any questions.
And if you have questions, please put them in chat, and we will go back at the end of the presentation for Q&A, and then turn it over to Melissa to complement some of the research that LynnAnn shared around HR and changes we see in the workplace.
Right, so it's a pleasure to be here and to go after LynnAnn, who mentioned culture and diversity, equity, and inclusion.
I'm a cultural anthropologist and wrote a book about the first generation of women on Wall Street and have continued to look at diversity, equity, and inclusion in finance for the last 3 decades. And today I just want to briefly talk about how can we maintain effective, inclusive corporate cultures when we're moving into a hybrid work environment, whatever that workplace may be, and how can we develop strategies to retain, train, advance women and other underrepresented populations. So what is the problem? We want to create these inclusive kinds of environment. I think it's important to identify the multiple disruptions impacting work and workers in the workplace, to diagnose what are the cultural challenges, particularly when it comes to recruiting, training, and then to think collaboratively with our employees, HR with employees, DEIB folks with employees, to really think about the cultural strategies that we can enable to support underrepresented populations. So I think it's important when we're thinking about cultural trends, to identify that there have been multiple disruptors in the financial workplace and in the workplace in general. We have COVID-19, we have novel technologies such as AI, and we also have new social movements, Black Lives Matter, earlier on Me Too, that are really changing fundamentally how people understand the employer-employee relationship, expectations about what constitutes social justice, addressing problems, perceptions of racism, sexism, diversity, equity, and inclusion, and as we mentioned, that kind of backlash. Now, financial services will not be a surprise to you, as you all know, has traditionally, particularly at the upper echelons, been white, male-dominated. So how can we as HR professionals and as myself as an organizational anthropologist, really help firms to understand why women, why underrepresented populations, people of color, are underrepresented? How can we help them decipher and address the mechanisms of inequality that prevent all but primarily white men from ascending to power? And I just want to briefly suggest, as an anthropologist, that a deep understanding of the social structure and the culture of Wall Street firms historically, now and in the future, can help us to address those questions. Some firms are, depending on the CEO and the history, by and large locked into older cultural models of work that may no longer serve, if they ever did, a diverse set of employees, while other firms are experimenting with more agile, flexible ways of working that may in fact enhance that. I'm going to show 2 different models, and I just want to be clear that these 2 models of work are not necessarily representative of a specific firm on Wall Street, but are rather sort of ideal types, to help us really understand what are the larger social structures at work, and then how we as HR professionals can move those social structures and change them. So if you think about a traditional male culture of work on Wall Street that I wrote about in my book about Wall Street women, you have a couple of very clear characteristics. First is the culture of presenteeism. This is kind of a traditional male culture of work, the kind of devotion of work, showing loyalty to the firm. Then we have, it's always in a hierarchical authority structure, the linchpin of traditional bureaucracies, in which managers do not experience authority in an unembodied way, but through a top-down mechanisms. It follows then that mentorship is the model of the mentor looking down or helping the mentee, right? So again, a kind of hierarchical model. And then within the overall structure, the work of diversity, equity, and inclusion and belonging is by and large in the hands of specialized folks, whether they are HR professionals, diversity, equity, and inclusion, or the ERG groups. So they're very siloed. How can we move the needle along? Kind of moving into an emerging, more flexible, agile, hybrid cultural work models, whether it's on Wall Street or elsewhere. So here are some ways in which, as I think all of you probably know in some capacity in the Zoom audience, what's happening and how can we move things along. First of all, is to really think about how can we have a more flexible, human-centered business model that it can adapt to the workforce, right? Excuse me. So that life and work can blend more seamlessly for all employees. And I think it's important to focus on it should be all employees, right? So we're talking about secretaries, we're talking about janitors, we're talking about the higher echelons. A less hierarchical, flatter, decentralized, hybrid, and agile organization that then envelops and enables different kinds of work models, multiple mentor models, digital and in person, so rather than a hierarchical one, and different kinds of leadership models, right? More collaborative, more collective, more intersectional. And finally, to really think about how can the work of diversity, equity, and inclusion, whether or not there is a backlash or not, how can we put it into the hands of everyone so that it's not siloed, so that it's not specialized, so that we recognize that a diverse set of experiences, perspectives, and backgrounds are crucial to innovation, developing ideas, and being successful in the global marketplace. Excuse me. I think spring has finally gotten to allergy. And I'm happy to address more trends as we move along. Apologies.
Thank you so much, Melissa, and sorry about the allergies. Spring is definitely in the air. And so with that background, again, thank you both, LynnAnn and Melissa, for that background. We're going to use some of that research and talk about how our practitioners have thought about leadership models and flexible arrangements in the employee experience and their actual lived experience at their organizations. And so to help us do that, we have 3 guests today. I'll do a brief introduction and then we'll jump into our conversation. So we have Zewu Dibibi. She serves as a Chief Human Capital Officer at PACT. She joined PACT in 2020 from ODA, which is a global minority and women-owned management consulting firm where she was the CEO. She's an accomplished business and human resources leader with more than 25 years of experience. Her background includes policy and strategy development. It combines best practices in human capital management with regulatory compliance. Zewu has worked across the human resources spectrum, ranging from employee and management development to corporate policy and procedures. Joining Zewu, we have Ash Rogers, who serves as the co-chief executive officer at Lawala Community Alliance. Lawala matches community-led change with university-backed research and evaluation to advance quality health for all. Prior to Lawala, Ash served as the director of operations at the Segal Family Foundation. She's also a Global Health Corps alum and serves as a board member of the Community Health Impact Coalition, Orkiswa School, and Como Learning Centers. Joining Ash is her co-CEO, Julius Mbea. He's responsible at Lawala for driving the mission of the organization and overseeing operations. Prior to joining Lawala, Julius worked with MS Action Aid Denmark, UNDP Kenya, and the World Bank funded Kenya Agricultural Productivity Project. He has an MA in political science and public administration from the University of Nairobi, a postgraduate degree diploma in healthcare management from the Kenya Institution of Management, and a postgraduate diploma in peace building and conflict resolution from the University of, I may pronounce this wrong, Freiburg, Switzerland. And so with that, I'm excited to dig into our conversation. And we'll start with a question for all 3 of our panelists, in line with our theme around the future of work and change. So whether it's about how we determine our leadership models in our organizations or how we set expectations for how our employees spend time in and out of the office, the future of work will require that organizations are nimble and ready to manage change. And so I'd appreciate if y'all could share, how does your organization think about change, and what is your philosophy for adapting and managing change? And maybe I will point to Zewu to get us started. Oh, Zewu, I think you're still on mute.
Thank you, Cheesy. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. First, I wanted to create some organizational context for how we've dealt with the flexible work environment that we've created. PACT has a little less than 2,000 employees of about 150 that operate out of the US office supporting our country offices. We operate in about 40 of them and on 3 different continents. So one of the first things we did, and this ties back to some of the discussions from the presentation, is we took a look at our workforce to say which what is the composition of our workforce? Because as we roll out this policy, we didn't want it to be just US driven or just US centric, but with sensitivity to the workforce that we have, some which do not work in an office setting because they're in the communities providing direct services in the communities that we serve. We then said, we have 150 employees in the DC office or in the U. And so what are some of the best ways in which we could create, for everyone across all of PAC to benefit from this flexible, a variety of different flexible work arrangements. As we do with most of our policies, we design them in the US office as we're trying to create some consistency in terms of how employees are experiencing the organization, and really with an eye on pulling in the DEI components so that we are serving the needs of our population, even when they're not located where most of these are developed. And we execute them through HR representatives we have in the different continents, and directly working with HR representatives in the country office who take whatever policies we have and they adjust them to the cultural, legal, social, and cultural norms, even in terms of sensitivity with language that we use in these guidelines. And I bring this up to say, as we started rolling out the flexible work arrangements, we have 3 different buckets. We have what we call flex work time, and flex work time just allows employees to designate hours of work, which coming out of COVID, people have made different arrangements within their life circumstances, such as having family members who've moved in. Others have moved away from the office locations where they worked, for those who worked in the office. So we were really taking all that into consideration. The flex time allows the employees to start at any time throughout the day. So in the mornings, they'd be able to drop off their kids, maybe deal with an aging parent, as long as there's a 4-hour overlap with the core people that they work with. So we wanted to continue to ensure that there was also continued operational needs that were being met. The second one is telecommuting, and telecommuting really came into place when we started coming back into the office, where we have 2 mandatory days in the office, 2 days in DC, 3 in some of our country offices. So these guidelines just provide guardrail, again, like I said earlier, with each country office making accommodations for their unique circumstances. And we truly call it guidelines and guardrails to ensure that consistency. Again, the big thing across most of our policies has been sensitivity to the unique working environment. So with telecommuting, it allows 2 days of work in the office. And for those employees who need to do more than who can't do more than the 2 days, we've given some provisions as long as those provisions met certain qualifying criteria, such as taking care of a parent, taking care of a child. Nothing that is legally mandated, but we were just sensitive to why they couldn't come into the office for days outside of the 4 working days. The other piece we have, and this is for people we termed working within reasonable commuting distance from the office. For those working outside of the telecommuting radius, for lack of a better word, we have remote work arrangements, and this is people who don't live close to the office. When we implemented this, we were only looking at people who were commuting, who had moved out a little bit further, who had long commutes. But then what we realized is that this remote work gave us the opportunity to begin recruiting, and this ties back to some of the concepts presented earlier, globally, even to support work in DC and even support work across different countries. So again, the reason why it was important to define these 3 buckets, each of them having their own unique administrative requirements, including being sensitive for people working from our country offices supporting DC, we had to pay attention to things like compensation, Do we do it on the US scale? Do we do it on the local scale? If we do it on the DC scale, it creates a lot of inequities given the country office salary scales. So we came up with certain parameters to help guardrails to help address that. I hope that helps.
And that was extremely helpful, and I think it would helpful for a number of our members who are struggling with how to design policies that are both structured but responsive and flexible. And I think what I heard from you is that the key piece was that there was a lot of room for customization based on where it was, and so it was not rigid in that people couldn't respond to kind of the human needs change from environment to environment. And I think that's a key takeaway. And I'm curious for Lawala, how, as you know, having an interesting model and having employees based in different areas, how you have addressed, particularly coming out of the pandemic, the same question around employee flexibility, arrangements, and also keeping operational efficiency going. So maybe I'll turn to Ash and Julius to kind of talk about how you all structure it at Lawala.
Yeah, so similar to what has been presented, we found certainly during the pandemic and then coming out of it that the requirements of our workforce were really changing. And also the story of Lawala is that we had most of our employees on site of our hospital. And so we had offices there. We have our admin offices there. All of our program teams were based out of this one campus and then would go into the field for their field work, and very few employees in other places. Even in the US, we had most of our staff that was in Nashville that came into an office hosted at Vanderbilt. And like many other organizations during the pandemic, there was a real need to change. One big important shift for Lawala was that we couldn't have people on the side of our hospital because it wasn't safe. And so we needed to both offer in-person office spaces somewhere else, as well as allow employees where it was appropriate when they weren't frontline health workers to be able to be based remotely. And so coming out of the pandemic, our organization was also going through other shifts in which we were working much more closely with government, in which we were working in new geographies. And so it really required us to look at each cadre within our health workforce, within our overall workforce, and think about what was appropriate for them. I'll let Julius add on to that.
Yeah, thanks, Ash. I think one is just those practical reasons. But before I go in, I think one of the things that I took away from the research is that I think is still playing in my mind is the realization that DEI is declining, despite the fact that, that the much progress that we have realized in a few short years, and just a constant reminder of how we are able to forget fast. And I think in a conversation like this, I think it's not enough to have policies. I think practice of it and just ensuring that this is an everyday engagement is the only way that you can keep alive. And so even if we are talking about flexibility of work, if it is not practice, it doesn't matter how many policies are in place, but like we are modeling it and we are able to show that that flexibility is actually the norm and culture of the organization. Yeah, just to build up on what I shared, I think there were the practical reasons of operating in the same location that is supposed to offer health services and also administrative, and we prioritize health services so that we can make that environment safe. But also to note that Lawala works in a very remote part of Kenya, and for us to be able to attract talent, it was incumbent upon us that we had to incorporate remote working options, especially for people with young families or people, certain talent that you cannot move to rural locations, but would still be very effective in delivering their work, technology, research. And by virtue of that, we have realized over time that lots of these things can actually be delivered remotely. and that you don't need to have people physically present in the office. Of course, that also comes with an assumption that everybody has ability to work from home, which I think is born out of our understanding of our environments, which might not favor everyone. So we have created room, even at the height of the pandemic, when we got alternative spaces, that we still allowed room for staff to come to a place that they would feel is convenient for work and supportive of the work that they are doing. And then the other thing that I wanted to mention is that it also enabled us to develop a remote work policy, which we did not have in place at that time. And as opposed to waiting for the policy to be developed elsewhere, to really learn from our environment and from our own unique experiences, and then customize a policy around that would include things like supporting individuals to have access to internet, working tools, and other things that would make them work remotely. Finally, it's actually just the interface between Kenya and US teams, because we overlap a lot in the work that we are doing, everything that we're doing, and allowing staff members who are overlapping in those hours and are expected to work late hours to also have flexibility in the time that they start their work day, so that can compensate for the time that they have to spend after hours to make our operation seamless. Yeah, I'll leave it there. Thank you. Yeah.
Those were some amazing insights. I think even for me, the idea that you need to know your staff. I think just to your point around not everyone maybe had the ability to work remotely, but you only know that because you have invested in your employees and know their situations are able to be flexible. And also the point around the policy was informed by the behavior, not the other way around. Not that we made the policy and then we hoped people would get in line. We saw how people were behaving and then we formed the policy to be responsive. And I think that's a great way to approach it. Though, Zaywood, a question back to you, even the best informed policy may not fit everyone. And so at PACT, it sounds like you all did a lot of work to develop these 3 buckets and the guidelines around that. But ultimately, it may not fit everyone or may not suit or align with everyone's life. So how do you handle when your policy does not work, or when there is pushback, or employees whose needs are not met by your policies? What is the approach that PACT takes in those kind of situations?
That's a nicely tough question. One thing we realized is that we cannot adjust policy every few months just because it's not meeting a need for a smaller group. The interest is really in being able to meet the needs of a majority of our workforce. And there are circumstances when what we can provide doesn't meet the needs of an employee, and so they'll need to make personal choices. However, there is so much flexibility that's built into this that we work very closely with the employee to make sure that it really that it supports them. I mean, we haven't. There's only been one circumstance, from what I can recall, where none of these 3 options work for them, between being able to come in at the time that works for you. Second, being able to work more than the allotted days in the office for those where that's relevant. Being able to work remotely. And also with some flexibilities around that. There's just been a lot that's put into ensuring that flexibility and that ability to get the needs of the work met. I mean, I can give you one example where none of this works is someone who has to be in the office, like our front desk person. The office opens up at a certain time, it closes at a certain time. We have 2 days where we need to have the front desk area covered. So in that case, there is very limited flexibility on those 2 days. And there are a few positions which work like that. We don't want anything to be so operationally disruptive and to further create an environment where there are perceived favoritism, inequities. And so the consistency and the transparency I think is really important in it. We really discourage these side arrangements that people have, which is why we've built so much flexibility. Because those side arrangements is what's led to morale issues of feeling that there were people who were favored, and we can really speak and justify why we've made the decisions we have regarding allowing some people to work remotely, not others. And I think, I mean, in the people business, it's really hard to be very prescriptive or very precise, but to a very comfortable level, I think our workforce really understands and appreciates, and they do use, you know, these flexibilities that we have built, that we've built.
Thank you. I saw Ash and Julia smile a bit with that question, and I wanted to invite you if there's an example or any additional insight you want to share about addressing employees whose needs are not met despite a flexible and inclusive policy around work.
I think we're smiling because there's a lot of resonance there, and we've learned this like transparency lesson many times, that, you know, the more that you're able to communicate and share various decisions, especially HR decisions, whether it's around, you know, disciplinary action or title change or salary or remote work arrangements, that sometimes those are scary things to share because you're worried about how they're going to be perceived. But really the biggest damage is done when people are left wondering. And once you're able to bring those things and kind of clearly explain, like, this is the rationale from leadership or from HR, then those challenges tend to be much smaller, and you move through that change management process more quickly. And I was also going to share just an individual story that we had with an employee that was really, she was really having a hard time in her personal life that made it difficult for her to perform her work responsibilities and to, you know, stay in line with the policies of the organization around work hours and location. And we had a really great, I think it was like a transformative experience with this individual, in which we were able to really talk through some of those situations and agree together that the best thing would be for her to go on an extended leave. And I was really skeptical. It's like, maybe this is actually, we should have just moved towards termination or towards a resignation. But we decided to invest in this person and say, let's take 2 months off. We're holding your position for you. Let's see what happens when you come back. And there was a really incredible transformation. That person just needed some space to deal with things in their personal life, to handle some of the stress that was coming from all different directions. And when they came back to the organization, they were that much more effective. And I'm really glad that we had invested in that person, rather than, you know, just kind of cast them off. And those are, you know, that's a case-by-case basis, and that's not the right move all the time. But I think in that employee's situation, it was really understanding her and what was happening in the wider context really allowed us, I think, to make a decision that was better for the employee and better for the organization.
And I think the ability of creating an environment where that can happen is the most important thing, because then what happens with most employees is that they will have these struggles, but they are unsure whether the solution would be available to them or even would be on the table to discuss. And I think creating an environment where they can be able to bring those things forward and to discuss them, then makes those solutions, even if they are outside of policy or not strictly what is provided for in policy. Policy is also, it's about negotiation. You know, it's not that everything is cast in stone and that it cannot move, but how do you create an environment in which you can be able to cater for unique needs that might arise that might not be provided for in policy, of course. Yeah.
So just to add one more thing, with most of our key policies, we actually solicit feedback and input and review from the workforce. On a monthly basis, we meet with the global HR teams, we meet with the global leadership we send out a draft, including this alternative work arrangement. And we send out a draft, we get input, feedback, tweak it according to the feedback and input. So as most of these bigger policies roll out, it's really taken into account the unique needs and sensitivities, to include sometimes putting notes on there that says, we have exceptions under these circumstances. So in terms of buy-in, because it's, it's not so prescriptive and it's not like a top-down model, it's let's build this together. People at times have taken pushback on the policies personal, not HR, not even, but people are like, well, I contributed to that. And so we're really using the workforce itself to be ambassadors for many of these, guardrails, compliance, and other policies that we roll out. Not all, but I would say the core ones that impact the lives of staff overall.
Thank you. That is very helpful. And I wanted to switch gears a bit to speaking about Luala's leadership model. So you, Ash and Julius, share the title of co-chief executive officer, which is an interesting kind of leadership model. And as I've learned, organizations are increasingly exploring ways in which to shape leadership to be responsive to the future needs of their workforce and their business. And so I'd love if y'all could speak about what your model is and how it came to be, as well as any best practices y'all could share, having spent some time in this model, kind of tweaking it and making it work for your needs.
Great, I'll start and we'll have Julius add in. This really came up with Luala looking at across our history. We were founded by a community in Western Kenya and two brothers from that community who came to Dartmouth and then Vanderbilt for medical school. They founded the organization both in Kenya and then founded an entity in the US to be able to primarily raise capital and support the mission in Kenya. And over the years had adopted a much more neo-colonial structure of a nonprofit in which you had an executive director in the US and a country director in Kenya who was reporting to that executive director and reporting into the US board. And when the board did a review of its strategy, it really realized that that wasn't what it had intended to build, and that it wanted to much more clearly center Kenyan leadership and wanted to be able to maintain the advantages of the resources and capital that was available through the US entity. And so as the former executive director was leaving, the organization first hired Julius as the managing director, and he ran the organization for about 6 months as they were recruiting for my position as executive director. And as we both entered the organization, the charge was basically from the board was like, figure out how to make some sort of co-leadership thing work. And the first thing that we identified was that we needed to shift the board. It was actually started at the top with the governance structure. And so we transformed the board. So we now have a Kenyan board. All of the members of the Kenyan board sit on the 501c3 board and make up a majority of the 501c3 membership. And then we were ready to even further shift the leadership structure so that we took on the roles of co-CEOs. I'm going to pause there, and maybe Julius, you can talk about what it actually looks like, our co-leadership model, and some of the advantages and functions of that model.
Yeah, I think I will look for somebody to do a book on this because we've spoken about it for so many times. And so, yeah, I think from what Ash is saying, I think the key thing, and I'm really excited that a number of organizations are going in this direction. And for a variety of reasons, I just wish that there is a little bit more thinking around it rather than just checking the box as to whether you want a co-leadership structure or not. Because we also know that their organizations have gone into it and walked back from it. I think the core principle around it is co-leadership, not co-management. And so one of the things that we have worked on is to have, what we say that we co-lead, but we don't co-manage, which means that Ash has her team, I have my team. Of course, those teams interface quite significantly, but there is also overlap in work, but there must be responsibilities that I am responsible for and things I'm accountable for. And the same way for Ash, things that she's responsible for and accountable for. So there could be an issue, for example, that we might differ on, or Ash might have a different opinion from what I'm having. But I think to agree or getting to a point where if it is my call, if I am the final decision maker on the issue, I will get the advisement that would come from Ash, would negotiate and get the advice. But I think I would make the final call, and in a similar way also for Ash. And I think that enables us to be able to run the organization and leverage the best of skills that we have in service of the organization. I think we have seen tremendous growth. I mean, just to give context, we got into the organization where just about $1 million. We are now 14 million over a 9-year period. And that has been made largely possible by leveraging the skills and possibilities that come from that leadership structure. And I think it then flows downwards to the teams that we are able to draw on teams from a variety of backgrounds and be able to leverage that for the organization while still remaining truly centered in our communities and responsive to the needs of the communities that we serve. I don't know, I think there are lots of questions around this. I receive requests quite often on people who are exploring this. And I think my advice all the time is, it is not expediency, it is a commitment that you want to co-lead and you want to run the organization together. And that takes a lot of negotiation and really agreeing. Like if you differ as people who are leaders behind the curtains, sort it out, and then present right front to the team instead of like a divided leadership, which will then impact how teams operate. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. I have personally a number of questions about the model, but want to create room for questions in the chat. And then if not, I'll circle back. One question that well, first, let me say thank you, Zaywood, Ash, and Julius, for sharing your insights from your experience at your organizations. I think both the organizations have interesting models that you've been trying, and it seems to have had success. I want to address some of the questions in the chat. One of them, Zaywood, for you specifically, was around guardrails that you use to address inequity in pay for employees based in DC versus employees based abroad. So the question for you, but also after you answer, Julius and Ash, if there's any experiences you want to share to that direction, please do.
All right, so, and I'll try and be as brief as possible. So we created a classification scheme across all of CAT, DC country offices by grades. So when we talk about a director, it means the same thing across all of our country offices. We then set pay scales, salary ranges in each country, So director level salaries in DC is based on benchmark data in DC. If it's in Nairobi, it's based on the Kenyan. So each country has its own salary structure. But again, the guardrails for how we do this looks the same. In terms of the remote worker and how that kind of ties back into this. So we have them on the local structure. If it's in Tanzania, it's the Tanzanian structure, plus a 15 to 20% premium for supporting DC. They also benefit from salary related adjustments that happen in our country offices because we want to keep that 20% premium. So we make inflationary adjustments. So they're eligible for that inflationary adjustment in the country office, whereas in the US, their same colleagues won't have. So the equity is created within the country offices. The salary equity is addressed within the country offices. And that's sort of the, because the equity is really relevant in the country offices. And through policy, that 15-20% is made clear to everyone. So I hope that answers the question.
Thank you. I don't know, Julius or Ash, if you have dealt with any similar guardrail setting around pay equity.
We've just done, oh, go ahead, Julius. I'll start, but we've just done a realignment of our salary structure. So this is really relevant for us. I'll speak to the US side, which is that we've worked very hard to align the salary structure. Julius and I are paid in the same pay scale. There's no difference based on country, and that's true for all of our director level positions. A director is a director, and your pay scale is the same. Nairobi's not a cheap place to live either, and depending upon where you are in the US, there's a lot of variability. And so we've worked really hard on that. What we have realized is that there are certain, not necessarily based on location, but based on job role, that the market's really different. And so we've had to align those specific roles. Specifically, when we are hiring for folks on our digital solutions team, when we're hiring developers, we're competing in Nairobi with Google. And so those salary skills look really different based on skill set, not necessarily just seniority. The same is true for folks who are working in fundraising or development. We found that those pay skills look really different than some of our other roles. And so we've had to take that into consideration, that's a little bit separate from the seniority of the person coming into the organization. Very interesting. Julius, was there anything you wanted to add?
No, just to mention that I think recognizing the differences would be like the employment benefits that are specific to different geographies. So the benefits in the US are structured differently than employment benefits in Kenya. So there would be variations there that take into consideration those local contexts, or country level.
Yeah, pension schemes, PTO, health insurance are all like specific to our country context. And Kenya has really different labor laws. The US has really different costs around healthcare. And so we had made the decision several years ago not to try to harmonize those things, but to have them relevant within the country context.
That I can imagine that was a very, very astute decision. Seeing no other questions in the chat, I wanted to wrap up with one more question around the leadership model. For organizations who are considering it, is there guidance you can provide on when a co-leadership model may not make sense for an organization?
We have a couple of principles that we've laid out to like what makes it work. And the first, and people just don't like to hear this, but like you have to get along, and there's a component of mutual respect and like professional chemistry that comes into play. And you could set up the best systems, but if the two people don't work well together, it is just gonna fail every time. The other thing that I've not yet seen work, though I know other groups are trying it, and so I think that, there might be a way forward. But I think what's really hard is when you have someone who is in an authority position who has not been sharing power, then they're trying to bring someone in as a co-CEO. I think that's really difficult. I've seen some of those transitions as that person who's the leader is transitioning out. So they call someone their co-CEO as part of a transition. I've seen that work, but I think it's really hard to truly share power when you've had a long-standing power indifference.
Thank you for that. A question came in, but I want to be respectful of everyone's time, our panelists as well as our guests. And so, Alana, thank you for that question. I will make sure that our panelists get that and get an answer back to you afterwards. Melissa and LynnAnn, thank you so much for sharing those insights and research at the top. I think a number of our audience members from the chat found it very interesting and useful. Ash, Julius, and Zaywood, I've learned a lot personally, and I hope those on the call have also learned a lot. As Malvika mentioned, this is one event in our series related to future of work, so please keep your eye out for future events. If you have any questions after the chat drops, feel free to email SID to share those questions. And then as the summary of the event, we'll get answers back to you. So thank you everyone for joining. And I hope you all have a great afternoon. We'll share PowerPoints and other resources as well.
Thank you, everyone. Goodbye.